Imagine you're walking down a quiet forest trail. The leaves crunch beneath your feet. The cool air brushes past your face, and everything seems peaceful until it isn't. What if I told you that in just 6 minutes, this serene walk turns into the most terrifying experience of your life? Let me take you there. Stay with me, because this story has a twist you'll never see coming. Set up. It all started with an ordinary Saturday morning. Sarah and her dog Max set out for their favorite hiking trail, a secluded path deep in the Appalachian Mountains. Sarah loved the quiet escape, and Max loved chasing squirrels. They had done this hike dozens of times before, without a problem. But that day, something felt off. As Sarah parked her car, she noticed the trailhead was unusually empty. Normally, she'd see at least a couple of other hikers or families around. Today, nothing. Not a single car in the lot. She shook it off, convincing herself it was just luck. More peace and quiet, right? But as she stepped onto the trail with Max trotting beside her, a chill ran down her spine, like she was being watched. The first mile of the trail was uneventful. The birds chirped, the trees swayed gently, and Max was his usual energetic self. But then, Sarah started noticing things. Small things. At first, it was the sound of snapping branches far behind her. She paused and looked back, but the trail was empty. She laughed it off, blaming it on a deer or maybe even Max's overactive tail. Then she noticed something else, the silence. The forest had gone completely still. No birds, no rustling leaves, nothing but the sound of her own footsteps and Max's panting. That's when she saw it, a strange symbol carved into the bark of a tree just ahead. It looked like an eye, encased in a jagged circle. She had never seen it there before, and something about it made her stomach twist. Max growled low under his breath, something he rarely ever did. Sarah felt her heart rate pick up. She debated turning back, but she was already halfway through the trail, and going forward seemed quicker. So she pressed on. The escalation. A few minutes later, things got weirder. Sarah thought she heard footsteps. Not hers. Not Max's. They were soft and deliberate, coming from somewhere off to the side of the trail. She stopped, straining her ears. Nothing. She started walking again, a little faster this time, but the footsteps started too. She stopped. They stopped. She turned quickly, scanning the dense trees, her pulse pounding in her ears. There was nothing there, or so she thought. But as she squinted into the shadows, she swore she saw movement. A figure, tall, thin, barely visible before it melted back into the forest. Her breath hitched. Was it a person? An animal? She couldn't tell, but something in her gut screamed, "Get out of here." She tugged on Max's leash, and he barked sharply, pulling her forward. Sarah didn't argue. She started jogging, the adrenaline coursing through her veins. And that's when she saw it. Another symbol. The same eye-like carving, this time on a rock directly in her path. Freshly carved, like someone had just been there. The realization hit her like a truck. She wasn't alone. Sarah broke into a full sprint. Her mind raced as fast as her feet. Who was out here? Why were they following her? And what did those symbols mean? She clutched her phone in one hand, but there was no signal. Of course. There never was in places like this. The footsteps were louder now, heavier, and definitely closing in. She glanced back, but immediately regretted it. A tall, shadowy figure darted between the trees, too fast for her to make out any details. But it was following her. No doubt about it. Max barked furiously, tugging harder on his leash. He seemed to know exactly where to go, leading Sarah off the trail and deeper into the forest. She didn't have time to question it. She just followed. For what felt like an eternity, they ran. Branches scratched her arms and face. Her lungs burned, and her legs screamed for her to stop. But the footsteps didn't. Whoever, or whatever, was chasing her wasn't giving up. Finally, Sarah spotted something through the trees. An old, abandoned cabin. She hesitated for half a second. Was it a trap? Was she running straight into more danger? But the footsteps were so close now, she didn't have a choice. She bolted toward the cabin, throwing open the creaky door and slamming it shut behind her. Inside, the air was damp and musty. The cabin was bare, except for a rickety wooden table and a single chair. Sarah pressed her back against the door, holding Max close as he growled at the shadows outside. Her hands trembled as she scanned the room for anything she could use to defend herself. Nothing, not even a stick. And then, the footsteps stopped. Total silence. Sarah held her breath, straining to hear anything beyond the pounding of her heart. Had they given up? Or were they waiting for her to come out? Just as she started to relax, a loud thud shook the door. Then another. Someone was trying to get in. Sarah's mind raced. She backed away from the door, clutching Max's collar as the thuds grew louder. The door wouldn't hold much longer. She braced herself, expecting the worst. But then, something strange happened. The thudding stopped. The silence returned. And then a low, guttural voice whispered through the crack in the door. "You can't hide forever." Sarah's blood ran cold. She turned to look for another way out, but her eyes landed on something she hadn't noticed before. On the far wall of the cabin, there was a mirror, and in the mirror, she saw him, the shadowy figure. But he wasn't outside. He was inside, standing right behind her. Outro, and that's where Sarah's story ends. The hikers who found her car days later never found her or Max. Just an empty cabin, with strange symbols carved into the walls and a single word scratched into the floor. Run. So the next time you're out hiking alone and you feel like you're being watched, maybe you are. But hey, it's probably nothing, right?